So, the Jesuits are running Bolshevik Russia. And it's at this time that the Jesuits set up their Gulag system in Siberia, because the Jesuits have been in control of Siberia for at least 60 years. The Jesuits will fake a meteor hitting the earth in Siberia at Tunguska. And the fact of the matter is, it's the first thermonuclear detonation in the world, carried out at Tunguska in 1908, thereabouts. So the Jesuits have perfected nuclear devices, nuclear detonations, well before 1945. So what happens is now the Bolsheviks, led by Trotsky, the Jew, Stalin, the white Gentile, Georgian. Stalin, remember, was not a Russian. He was a Georgian. Just like Hitler was not a German. He was an Austrian. This is the danger that we face when we allow foreigners to run our countries. This is why the American Constitution said the man that's to be president has to be an American. He has to be an American that will be natural born. He has to be a natural born citizen. This is what Obama was not. So, the Bolshevik Revolution takes place, and for 10 years, from about 1922 to 33, the Jews, it appears, are running Russia. Why, it's the Jews! In 1919, certain Masonic Jews take over Bavaria. And they're going to run Roman Catholic German Bavaria for about 18 months. All facilitated, by the way, by Jesuits, of course, to make the communist movement look Jewish, when the communist movement is strictly Jesuit, because they perfected the doctrines of communism on their reductions in Paraguay from 1609 to 1759. But we have to make communism look Jewish. So we have to have the father of modern day communism appear to be a Jew, who's Karl Marx, and a high-level Freemason. What we are not told is what was told to the German people by Otto von Bismarck, the Bible-believing, born-again Lutheran Christian man who said Karl Marx was tutored by the Jesuit Peter Becks in the British Museum for many years. And Peter Becks goes on to be the head of the Jesuit order in the late 1800s. So the Bolshevik Revolution, why, it's Jewish. The Jews have taken over Russia. And these Jews are killing the Orthodox. See why the Orthodox people hate the Jews? They believe the lie that the Jews killed their leaders and imprisoned the patriarch. All for the purpose, as we shall see. So Stalin, then, who's the secret power behind the Jesuits in the Bolshevik Revolution, Joseph Stalin will be trained back in the 1800s, from 1896 or thereabouts, for 4 or 5 years by Capuchins in Gori, and they see the leadership of Joseph Duchaveli, or however you say his last name, and they give him an all-paid education, a scholarship, to Tiflis Seminary, where Stalin will be trained by certain Jesuits disguising as Orthodox, and one of them is Father Dmitri. Father Dmitri is a tutor of Stalin, and then all of a sudden, at the end of 5 years, Stalin begins to advocate communist doctrines, and Father, I believe it's Dmitri, expels Stalin for becoming a communist. But when Stalin comes to power, and he's busy purging in the 30s and the 40s, in the 30s, He never purges Father Demetrius. That's his name, Demetrius. He never purges Father Demetrius. I wonder why. Because Father Demetrius was the Jesuit who brought him to power. Demetrius dies in 1941. Peaceful death. So Stalin, in the beginning of the early 30s, begins his purges. It's called The Great Terror. There's a book on it called The Great Terror. And he purges all the enemies of the Jesuits. And his right-hand man is a man named Alexander Paskrevishev. And you can read about this in a book titled Svetlana, written in the 1960s when she's the daughter of Joseph Stalin. She wrote the book when she was brought here through the Jesuits and their CFR into the United States, I believe in the 1960s. So, Joseph Stalin will carry out the purges as directed by Alexander Paskrevishev. And there is a French church in Moscow that is the real meeting place for the Jesuits there in overseeing Stalin. And you can read about this in a book titled In Lubyanka's Shadow by Leupold L.S. Braun, The Memoirs of an American Priest in Stalin's Moscow from 1934 to 1945. And I quoted in my book showing that in this particular church, we have American congressmen and statesmen going to visit, and one of them is Dewey, who runs for president. The filthy swine. So, in Lubyanka's Shadow, you want to get this book by Braun. Stalin is trained by Jesuits when he's in school. And you can read about this in a book titled Three Who Made a Revolution by Bertram Wolfe, W-O-L-F-E. And in this book, Stalin talks about the Jesuits. And in this, he talks about them on page 410 or thereabouts. And he says that they're always in 411. He says, then being nearly 15, he entered. Then being nearly 15, page 411, he entered the Tiflis Theological Seminary on a free scholarship, providing uniform, clothing, meals, and lodging. The studies were dull, dogmatic, repetitive. The discipline was that of a spiritual barracks. Loyalty to God and the Tsar, the order is not certain, being the overriding consideration in determining the content of all subjects. The students were immured within the walls except for a brief leave on Sunday afternoons. And we read further, were spied upon and regimented from matins to lights out. This is the Jesuit formation. This is Jesuit formation. Stalin thus described the seminary life in his interview with Emil Ludwig. Emil Ludwig was a very notable Jewish historian in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He wrote a book on Bismarck and Mussolini and some other stuff. Going on, so here's what Emil Ludwig said, this Jewish historian. Ludwig, what drove you to become a rebel? Was it perhaps because your parents treated you badly? Stalin, no, my parents were uneducated people, but they did not treat me badly by any means. It was different in the theological seminary of which I was then a student. In protest against the humiliating regime and the Jesuitical methods that prevailed in the seminary, I was ready to become, and eventually did become, a revolutionary, a believer in Marxism. Now notice Stalin is familiar with the Jesuits when he's speaking to Ludwig. But do you not grant the Jesuits any good qualities? Stalin. Yes, they are methodical and persevering in their work. But the basis of all their methods is spying, prying, peering into people's souls to subject them to petty torment. And is there good in that? For instance, the spying in the dormitory. At 9 o'clock, the bell rings for tea. We go to the dining hall, and when we return, we find that a search has been made and that all our boxes have been turned inside out. What is there good in that? Unquote. Stalin was saying that he was trained by Jesuits in Tiflis. Right here. Okay, continuing on, as we just covered, Stalin's confession that he had been trained by Jesuits at Tiflis Seminary in Georgia. Remember, at this time, from like 1894 to 1899, when he's being trained, the Jesuits are expelled from Russia. The Bolshevik Revolution takes place, 1917. 1922, Lenin, according to the book Descent into Darkness by James J. Zatko, written in 1964, a priest and an instructor at Notre Dame in Indiana. That author tells us that the Jesuits were formally readmitted into Russia by Lenin in 1922. This is huge. Stalin then is overseen by Edmund Walsh. Walsh oversees certain other leading Jews, Litvinov and others. But Stalin is working with Walsh, Jesuit Edmund Walsh. And 10 years later, or thereabouts, 15 years later, Edmund Walsh will be sitting next to Franklin Damnable Roosevelt in the White House when Roosevelt formally acknowledges the government of Bolshevik Russia in December, I believe, of 1933. Edmund Walsh is sitting next to FDR when FDR acknowledges the government of communist Bolshevik Russia. This will allow American industrialists to begin to build factories in Russia, one of whom is Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford will entertain Bolsheviks at his Ford Motor Company, and I have this proven in my book, Vatican Assassins, so that they will begin to build Gorky. And Gorky will be an automotive plant set up in Russia, and Ford will provide 300 American families to go over there and work in Bolshevik Stalin's Russia. One of them will be a Jew whose name is Victor Herman. Victor Herman would be a young man. He would have certain world records jumping out of an airplane at, I think, 100,000 feet, something like that. Victor Herman, whose father was a communist, a Jewish communist, thinking that Russia was finally the Shangri-La of communism, his father and mother and the family will go over to Russia along with the other families sent by Ford, and all of them will be rounded up and sent to Gulag concentration camps, including Victor Herman, the Jew. And Victor Herman will tell his story in a book titled Coming Out of the Ice, The Unexpected Life by Victor Herman. You got to get it. You got to read it. A goofball movie was made on it years ago with Chris Christopherson, but the utter horrible wickedness of what went on there is accurately depicted by Victor Herman in his book, Coming Out of the Ice. He also wrote another book that is unbelievable. It's an 80-page book. I have it for sale on my website. It's called The Gray People. The Gray People. And it's about life in the concentration camps, the Gulag of Russia. And it is unbelievable. You got to read that too. But these concentration camps run in Russia are run by the same Jesuits that are running the concentration camps in Germany. They're going to be the same Jesuit order that's going to run the FEMA camps here in America. The same brotherhood. Just different days, different times. But same doctrine. So Stalin then, Lenin is murdered. He's poisoned in 1926, I believe. 24, 26. And the Jesuits begin to get rid of the Jewish leadership of the Bolsheviks for the next 10 years. For 10 years, the Jews are openly involved. You have Trotsky building the Red Army and so on. So from 1922 to 1932, you have these Jewish leaders that are openly portrayed to the world as running communism. But the man of power, the man of steel, the one who's really going to be put in power is Joseph Stalin. And when Stalin is put in power, he takes over the Kremlin. He's advised by Proskevitchev, and he begins the Great Terror. And during the Great Terror from 1936 to 38, I believe, he's going to kill hundreds of thousands of Russians. And he's going to kill all the leading Jews that were involved in the Bolshevik Revolution, except one. And that Jew, his name is Lazar Kaganovich. All the other Jews will be killed. And Lazar Kaganovich is Stalin's token Jew, to make it look to the Jew bashers of the world that it's really the Jews running Russia. And so, as the Bolshevik Revolution is taking place, there will be a certain priest who's a Jesuit, secretly, he's of the Order of St. Jerome, and he's going to write a book. And that book will be known as Mein Kampf. Leo Lehman tells us in his book Behind the Dictators that a priest really wrote Mein Kampf. And I think Edmund Paris says the same thing in his book, The Vatican Over Europe. Anyway, Hitler did not have the ability to write Mein Kampf. All he read was newspapers. He lived in a flop house in Vienna. He was nothing. He was just a loudmouth agitator, Austrian, Roman Catholic. But he will be used by the Jesuits to be the leader of Germany in the West. And Stalin will be used by the Jesuits as the leader of the Russians in the East, so that Stalin and Hitler, who walked the grounds of Schönberg Castle, the Habsburg Castle in Vienna in 1912, they're buddies, both trained by Jesuits, both prepared for their roles, both financed by Henry Ford, both backed by Britain and America with the Anglo-American International White Power structure working for the Pope. They're going to bring these guys to power. There's a book called Hitler Was a British Agent. You need to read that too. Churchill and Hitler and Stalin and FDR and Mussolini all worked together along with the Masonic Jewish labor Zionists, including Ben-Gurion and Theodor Herzl. Not Herzl, but Ben-Gurion and who's the other founder? Oh, Chaim Weizmann. They're all working together. There's another book you got to read called Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. They're all working together. And so one of the things that they have to accomplish during World War II is the destruction of the Pale of Settlement. The Pale of Settlement was started by that prostitute of a whore, Catherine the Great, Catherine II the Great, who became the Tsaress of Russia in the late 1700s. She will poison her husband, and who is the Tsar. She'll poison him. I forget which Tsar he was, but he will be poisoned by Catherine the Great. And you have Catherine the Great controlled by the Jesuits in Russia, and you have Frederick the Great controlled by the Jesuits in Prussia, the apostate Lutheran, and the perfecter of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the head mason on all continents, the entire continent at the time. So Frederick the Great and Catherine the Great will work together to begin to build what is called the Pale of Settlement. The herding of Jews into Poland, Hungary, Eastern Russia. This is called the Pale. You can find a map of it on Google. And so when the time is right, Hitler will invade Russia on September 1st of 1939, and Stalin will invade 17 days later on the 18th of September from the east. And Stalin and Hitler will divide Poland. And they will kill the Polish nationalists, the Polish manhood that love their country, Poland. They will kill approximately, it's no 7,000. It's more like 20,000. They're going to kill 20,000 Polish men in Smolsk, in the Katyn forest and other places, to get rid of any Polish manhood that would stand against the occupation of Poland by the Soviets and the Nazis from 1939 to 1941. Because Poland is the place, Roman Catholic Poland, that super power place of the Jesuits in Eastern Europe. The Jesuits will then be the ones behind the erection of the concentration camps, the 6 death camps in Poland, which was Auschwitz, Treblinka, Chelmo, Belzec, Majdanek, and Sobibor. All those camps will be Jesuit-controlled camps run by the Jesuit-controlled SS, because the SS was modeled after the Jesuit order, and you can read this in a book called Heinz Hone's work titled The Order of the Death's Head. The Order of the Death's Head. And as I document in my book, the Gestapo and the Soviet NKVD met together in Poland on 3 separate occasions before the invasion of Russia and Germany in 1939. They worked together. And when Stalin and Hitler come to power, they divide Poland, and they enter into a treaty called the Ribbentrop-Molotov Agreement. Ribbentrop is the man from Germany representing Hitler. Molotov is the one from Russia representing Stalin. And in this agreement, they agree to work together. They are in treaty with one another. And because of this agreement, Leon Trotsky denounces Stalin, totally disagrees with this agreement, for which reason Stalin puts a hit out on Trotsky. Trotsky has to leave Europe. He goes to Mexico City, and there a Spanish assassin, Roman Catholic assassin, is sent by Stalin to kill Trotsky with a hatchet to the head. And a picker, a hatchet, an ice picker, I think it's a hatchet. So they're eliminating all the Jewish leaders. Remember, Trotsky built the Red Army. Remember, in 1928, the Nazis, the German army, is rearmed when they go into Russia, and the army is created in Russia because Russia is not a party to the Versailles Treaty. This is a great secret, further exploited, further shown by Edmund Walsh in his book Total Empire. So, Stalin and Hitler will be working together for the destruction of the Jews of the Pale of Settlement. No Jew is allowed to emigrate into Russia. This is no man's land. And Stalin, anybody that goes into Russia, escapes, he's going to kill him. And the Jewish man who wrote the book, To Eliminate the Opiate by Rabbi Marvin Entelman, said that Stalin killed 1 million Jews. Stalin and Hitler worked together for the entire duration of the war. That's why Stalingrad was lost. Stalingrad was nothing but the mass murder of Russian Orthodox men and Lutheran Prussian men as they were ordered to their deaths for 18 months, and nearly 1 million people died at Stalingrad. It was a great Jesuit victory for the extirpation of heretics. And meanwhile, Hitler will not allow his armies east to conquer Moscow. I met a former SS man by the name of Freddie who lived over in Palmyra, Pennsylvania. Knew a CIA assassin that I knew over there, and Freddie told me that we were 18 kilometers from Moscow and we were told to go south. We were not allowed to take Moscow because Hitler and Stalin are working together. The Jesuits are building the Soviet Empire to be used against America in a future day, as rightly discerned by General George Patton. So, Stalin will donate 20,000 Russian prisoners of war to the Nazis to build Auschwitz. Stalin and Hitler work together. You need to get a book called Hitler's Traitor. Hitler's Traitor. And the author, it eludes me right now, but find it on the Google, it's Hitler's Traitor, and he shows that Martin Bormann was the liaison between Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin through the Red Orchestra, and in the book Unholy Trinity by John Loftus, he talks much about the Red Orchestra. Well, Hitler and Stalin are working together. They're both traitors to their own people. They're both traitors to the Russians and traitors to the Germans. And why wouldn't they be? Because they're foreigners working for the Jesuits. Remember, Stalin admitted he was trained by Jesuits at Tiflis. So, Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler are going to eliminate the Jews of the Pale of Settlement. And you know who's going to aid them in doing that? The military government of the United States, established by the Jesuits through Franklin D. Roosevelt on March 9, 1933. Skull and Bonesman Averell Harriman in June of 1941, will sign an agreement giving $11 billion in aid to Stalin's Bolshevik Russia for military war material. It's called Lend-Lease. And Skull and Bonesman Averell Harriman will be the one to facilitate it. Averell Harriman will go to Russia. He'll be the personal friend of Joseph Stalin, and the great murdered historian of Stanford who wrote the book Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. That great historian, Anthony Sutton, will be murdered after he finished writing his book on the Skull and Bones and their control of Bolshevik Russia and America working together during the Bolshevik Revolution. So they're going to kill the Jews. That's why FDR, advised by Cordell Hull and these other wicked sinners, Secretary of State at the time, refuses to bomb one set of train tracks leading to Auschwitz. They'll bomb Ploiești. My father was involved in the bombing raids of Ploiești in Romania, bombing the oil fields there. They can bomb Ploiești in the oil fields in Romania. They could surely bomb one set of tracks to Auschwitz. Oh no. Because you see, FDR, Stalin, and Hitler, and Churchill are all working together for the destruction of European Jewry that will necessitate and justify the Jews, surviving Jews, returning to Israel and starting their own country, because they're going to see they have no place to live on the face of the earth. And you can read more about this in another book written by John Loftus, a Jesuit-educated Irish Catholic, but the book, it has lots of good things. It's called The Secret War Against the Jews. And it has FDR and Churchill and Stalin and all those bastards. And by the way, remember, Churchill and Stalin and FDR were all brother Freemasons, according to Jim Shaw's great book, The Deadly Deception. The big three at Yalta were all Masons. So, the book you want to read about in the destruction of the Pale of Settlement is called Bloodlands. Bloodlands. A very popular book, maybe 8 years ago. And it shows the annihilation of the Jews of the Pale of Settlement. All of it overseen by the Jesuits. The Jesuits would also run the Einsatzgruppen into Russia, led by criminals. The Jesuits would oversee the evacuation of his high-level SS out of Europe through certain Jesuit-controlled bishops like Alois Hudal. Hudal oversaw the Vatican rat lines leading out of Austria into Italy, and from there all across Europe into Ireland, to Canada, to America. And Francis Cardinal Spellman in 1949 is going to be made a cardinal. He's going to oversee all the Vatican rat lines coming into this country. I'm bringing in all the top Nazis, including Werner von Braun, the head of the Gestapo, Heinrich Müller, all these wicked Roman Catholic sinners working for the destruction of not only the Jews, but the Protestants of Europe, are brought here. Some estimated 50,000 of them. Well, when Russia and Germany invade Poland in 1939, there is a certain Jesuit priest, American Jesuit, that is involved, and he goes with a Russian Jesuit into Russia, and there he spends 5 years in Lubyanka. Lubyanka will be the holy office of the Inquisition, as I've said. And there, Walter Sisek, a street tough, a Polish-American Roman Catholic from the coal region of Pennsylvania, this street tough will be the greatest inquisitor of the 20th century, apart from Stalin himself, in the murder of millions of Russian Orthodox people, because Walter Sisek will oversee the entire Gulag in Russia for 17 years. He will spend a total of 23 years in Russia. And Kennedy in 1963 arranged for Walter Sisek to be released in exchange for 2 Russian spies. And so Sisek comes back, and he comes back to the novitiate over here in Wernersville, Pennsylvania. He's greeted as a hero when he comes back, that he was persecuted by the communists in Russia, and he suffered in the concentration camps. And that's the cover story. But Walter Sisek's dear Jesuit buddy, Daniel L. Flattery, was also a personal friend of George Herbert Walker Bush. That's right. And this little book, With God in Russia, that Sisek will supposedly write, it was probably ghost-written, shows of how he suffered in the concentration camps in Russia. The secret but truth of it is he oversaw the KGB, NKVD, and later KGB. KGB starts in 1953. And for 10 years, he's there in Russia overseeing all of it. And to prove this theory of mine, I got to know a Jesuit over at the novitiate, now a spiritual center in Warnersville of the Jesuits. It was financed and built by the Brady family out of New York. Nicholas Brady was the head of over 100 New York corporations. He was wealthier than Rockefeller. And a high papal knight that died in 1928. His wife, Genevieve Brady, a dame of Malta, greeted Pacelli when he came here in 1936. Pacelli will Secretary of State. He'll go on to be the Pope Pius XII, overseeing all of these dictators in not only the Eurasian Jewish Holocaust, but the Lutheran Holocaust, the Reformed Holocaust. Remember, the SS had a special camp for Dutch Reformed preachers in the Netherlands. Only they were sent to it. We're never told about that. I think the camp's name was Ulm or something like that. It's one syllable. So, Cizik goes into Russia. He spends 5 years at Lubyanka perfecting the art of torture. And in Lubyanka, they managed to get certain volumes of the Holy Office of the Inquisition out of Spain and all the methods of torture. And they perfected them in Lubyanka and then subjected their poor Orthodox victims to the Inquisition of the Jesuits running Lubyanka and ultimately the entire Gulag system. Yep. So this is Walter Cizik. And through my interest in Walter Cizik, I got to know a Jesuit over here his nickname was Brother Suds. And I love the old man. I gave him the gospel, showed him how to be saved. I gave him a copy of my Vatican Assassins, which, after he died, just disappeared. Probably at the provincial's desk in Maryland. Anyway, I talked with Walter Cizik. And I said, Walter, I said, tell me about, Brother Suds, tell me about Walter Cizik. He said, oh, I knew him well. I knew him when he came back from Russia. I said, Brother Suds, Walter Cizik was an inquisitor. He was a mass murderer, killed millions, responsible for the death of millions of Orthodox people. He said, oh, no. I said, tell me, Brother Suds. I said, when you looked at Walter, were his hands gnarled as though he worked in a concentration camp for 17 years? And he stopped. And he looked at me. And then he looked down and he said, oh, Walter. Oh, Walter. It never occurred to him that Walter Cizik was indeed an inquisitor. And we went out to the graveside of Walter Cizik there, the novitiate, and now the spiritual center in Warnersville. And it's the only gravesite, because remember, all the Jesuit tombstones are the same. It's a white tombstone with a black base. All the same shape, same size, same thing written on for the most part. The name of the Jesuit or the temple coadjutor, the day he was born, ingress, the day he joined, the day he was born, natus, the day he was born, the day he went into the Jesuit order, ingressio, and the day he died, obit, and that's all that's on the tombstone. They're all the same. Perfect communism. And we went out there and saw the crucifixes and the beads all hung on Walter Cizik's tombstone. And there's a special little metal hanger there that all the people come out and hanging on. They put their rocks on the top of the tombstone. This Walter Cizik's a hero. And in the early 2000, I went with my wife-to-be, Danita. We just decided to take a little ride in my blue Ford Ranger truck out to the novitiate. I said, I want to show you something. I want to show you this cemetery that's shaped with a vaginal shape of the Virgin Mary. So we went out there. And when we went down the road there, down to where that cemetery is, there were maybe 50 Jesuits or so, at least. There with the Jesuit Superior General Peter Hans Kolbenbach. And I looked at him, he looked at me. Not that he knew me, but I just decided I need to get out of there. Well, what they were doing was they were giving a special service for the greatness of Walter Ciszek. Jesuit Superior General Peter Hans Kolbenbach with another 50 Jesuits, and they were all in cassocks. They were all in cassocks. Because this is what they do. This is what they're about. The destruction of the Protestant Reformation, the destruction of the Orthodox Church. That's why the Jesuits have foisted upon the Orthodox leaders, many of them trained by Jesuits, their perverted Westcott and Hort Greek text. In the Orthodox Church over in Lancaster, I've seen it personally myself in the priest's office. I looked at his Greek text, and there it is. Nestle text. Westcott and Hort Nestle Greek text. Pro Jerome's Latin Vulgate. It's not the glorious Word of God, the Byzantine text that the Orthodox Church had for 400 years or more. More than that, 700 years. So, Walter Ciszek is this inquisitor. Walter Ciszek has his grave there in Wernersville. And I encourage any of you Orthodox leaders, you need to take a trip out here. I'll take you to the cemetery. You want to go there? I'll show you where it's at. And he is a trophy to the holy office of the Inquisition, which the Jesuits continue to run today under the guise of communism, fascism, and any other ism that has a military dictator. So I just wanted to make this recording for you, especially you Orthodox people of Russia, to know just who has wrecked your country, who has financed the Bolsheviks, who has financed the Russians, the Russian Red Army. You need to read another book called Nightmare in Red, written by, I believe, Hans Gerlach. When all the Soviet war machine was coming into Germany, the Jeeps and everything, it all said made in USA. As they plundered and decimated Germany, especially Prussia, gang raping the German women 20-1, and the Polish women. The German women were so viciously raped, there were 100,000 episiotomies performed, sewing the rectum and the vagina, separating that muscle that was torn by the savage gang rape of the Russian communist red savages, which was the policy of the Jesuits running the Red Army, because they wanted to totally destroy the Lutheran white Prussian Saxons, because they were the greatest enemy of the Jesuits from Bismarck from 1870 to the time the Jesuits were given formal re-entry into Germany in 1917 by that filthy swine Kaiser Wilhelm II, that traitor to his own German people and backer, ultimately, of Adolf Hitler through Kaiser's sons. So this is the horrible, terrible story of what the Jesuits have done to Russia. And the Russian military is being prepared today for what I show in my book called the Sino-Soviet Muslim invasion. The Jesuits are going to use Russia and China and the other Far East nations in conjunction with the Muslims of Africa to invade North America in a future day for the final destruction of freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, for the final destruction of the last bastion of liberty for the Jews in the world, for the final destruction of the last nation that is a portion of it holding to the Reformation King James Bible, the AV 1611, for the final destruction of the last population that's gun-owning. This is what they're being prepared for right now. This is why they ended the Cold War, so that the Jesuits could bring all sorts of Western technology into Russia in preparation for them to go under a military dictator and go ultimately into the invasion of North America. That's why you have the Russian-American Space Lab, just giving them all the technology they want. There's no Russian technology that doesn't ultimately come from America, that they don't build upon. That includes their atomic detonation in 1953, given to them through Dirty Harry Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And you can read about this in a book titled Major Jordan's Diary. Okay, well, I think I made my point. I just want all of you people to know that are listening, thank you for tuning in, and that you can always listen to my broadcast on 247worldradio.com. I preach and speak every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 10 to 12 o'clock, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. for 2 hours. I cover topics such as these, and it's my prayer that God would send a great awakening among the Russian people and all other peoples to see what the Jesuit order, what the Roman papacy run by the Jesuits has done to us for the 20th century, and they intend to do the same thing during the 20th century. So, may God help us to wake up and to believe the true gospel that the Lord Jesus Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. He was buried and rose again according to the Scriptures, 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4, which is the gospel. He's commanded all men everywhere to repent and to truly believe this gospel, because God's going to judge every man one day by his Son who is raised from the dead. This man, the risen Lord Jesus Christ, the Yeshua of the promise of the Hebrew Scriptures, who has come and will come again, a second time without sin unto salvation as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, to then punish his enemies, save his elect racial brethren, the Hebrew Jewish Israelites, and then institute his 1,000-year reign of his Davidic kingdom. So, until we meet again, Maranatha.